So, welcome again, everybody. And is there anything anybody would like to discuss while we are all here? Any topic?
One other thing that maybe we can just get everyone's view on, I think in the Slack channel, in the public Slack channel, there are multiple people who are saying that, oh, there's some insufficient information from the docs or things like that. And but I think so far we've been having trouble to get like what exactly it is, right? And so like if we know, okay, there's some missing docs in particular area, then we can find a way to fill the gap, right? And so I'm just wondering, the maintainer, like, do you see any particular areas that you think there's a gap that we need to fill, or there's some through the questions coming from the Slack channel, maybe there's not very clear documentation happen somewhere.
I suppose one of those areas would be discovery, in the sense that if you're a new LoopBack developer, it's a bit difficult to find information beyond the typical to-do list examples where you quickly use the CLI and then to just build most of the application. So if you want to do more intermediate kind of use cases, you have to scour through the how-to guides. And to go through the how-to guides, you need to already have an idea of what you need to look out for. So I think one area we could improve is the transition between getting started with LoopBack and then how to actually modify the code so that you can tailor for more advanced use cases. So perhaps we could have an additional set of tutorials that build on top of the to-do tutorial to aid in things like understanding how filters work, how the LoopBack connectors work, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So on the documentation side, we built one page, which is inside a LoopBack application. Sort of try to correlate the concepts, motivations to real world like use cases. And as you said, we need to have incremental paths that guide the developers to go from very simplistic to do crawl kind of application to something close to a real world requirement, and we can sort of explore that from a few different angles. For example, say, hey, you have the basic to do, and you use the memory database to start with. So maybe we should think about how to use MongoDB or MySQL for that purpose. Then for to do, maybe the typical database is not good enough to support certain APIs. You need to invoke, external REST APIs or something else. Then what do you do, right? Then we can expand that to the security perspective. Now you have all the functions available. How do you make sure you have authentication and authorization in place? So like starting from the bare bone scaffold application and teach developers how to expand or improve the application from multiple perspectives.
Yeah, I agree. I think what we just need to do now is to find out and strike that balance of providing that path while ensuring that we can assure doc maintainability. Because I think that's also one of the areas of concern is when the docs are a bit too large, it becomes difficult to find out which areas of the docs we need to update if, for example, our best practices change or certain things are no longer applicable to the newer versions.
So to me, it's still very much like navigation and this discovery issue, as Rifa pointed out, we do have a lot of materials here and there. And if you know what to search for, then you may be able to find this information by searching. But from the sidebar and the navigation perspective, some new users can be lost. Even speaking for myself, sometimes I want to find some information. I have to click on multiple items to find where the menu item on the left side has been, rendered somewhere. And what's interesting to me is, many items actually have different can be referred to by different passes, and since the navigation bar, we can only pick one pass, right? So sometimes it's hard if you come in from a wrong pass. So how we can facilitate that, it's always a challenge. Like, we're kind of promoting more links between different pages, and even think about have obvious like no or see also kind of block on the page, so you can navigate from that page to other pages. So those are the things may make the doc insurance much more enjoyable, I guess. Of course, like following what a typical developer would do with LoopBack 4, from a ground zero to step 1 to step 2, all the way to close to production ready application. Like that, step into the deployment perspective, building Docker images, introduce cloud native extensions, push to Kubernetes. Those are very typical paths. And even for my personal experience working on IBM internal microservices, we kind of doing that all the time.
Yeah, so I pretty much agree with your points over there. Just to add on to that, I think what the docs also tend to lack probably is providing the why in certain elements, like why are certain things done this way, or what is the purpose of a certain item inside the bigger picture. So if we take, for example, the open API decorators, or even the property decorators, there are multiple elements involved inside those components. So for example, the property decorator, there is the root level for your type, and all the other things that get used by both REST and the repository levels of LoopBack 4. But then there's also the JSON schema object within that is only used for the REST side. Now that's, for us, it's pretty clear cut because we understand how LoopBack functions underneath the hood. But for someone that's coming in new, for example, while we do not support enum at the root level, we support it at the JSON schema object. But it's not really clear to the user what the JSON schema lacks compared to, say, like a first-class implementation on the root level. So I think we could potentially work on those areas.
Yeah, that's good feedback. And I think our new maintainer more recently has contributed quite a few documentation related PRs, which kind of go into the past to separate the different concerns, basically reflect some of the documentation into how to and explanation sections. So I think he's really helping there as well.
I think that's a great initiative. The PRs look really good, and I can see how it definitely clears up the documentation quite a bit and makes it less loaded and more concise.
Yeah, I agree with Rifa that we should definitely try to include more of whys, because someone who's not familiar with the code base, when they see something, when it's done in a certain manner, which may be something which they may think that, oh, this the experience is not good, or the way we are doing it may not seem very efficient. But once they understand why, then it starts to make sense of the design that we have used. And even for us who came in the project a little later, we had to go through the code base and spend some time to understand why the decision was made.
Yeah, I think there's definitely knowledge gap even within the team as well. And the why question actually may have to happen at multiple levels. I think we are trying to answer some of the whys from the use case perspective. Kind of explain for a typical target loopback application, what are the common tasks people have to do without the framework, and how the framework can introduce some abstractions to allow these common problems to be solved in a fairly generic way without too much development repeating their own efforts. I think we are doing reasonably okay now with that why answer, but then the next level could be the more like deep dive why, right? So some techniques like how you solve certain problems. So for example, the JSON schema was introduced at the property level so that we can have more validation constraints to be understood by the AGV framework. Beyond just the persistent mapping, right? And also the Open API decorators are introduced to add additional metadata, so we know how to map the TypeScript method to a meaningful RAS route. And we introduced quite a bit of facility for the context module so that we can support some use cases like, hey, you have a request coming in, and based on the request, you might be able to, customize the downstream resource for that particular user or particular tenant. Then with that, together with the context hierarchy, you have the ability to shadow or replace some of the resources that will impact the downstream controller dependency injection. Right? So there are certain techniques that can be achieved by the features we introduce, but a lot of users don't have that, context, right? So they're not being educated with that kind of context so that they can drill down from the high-level use case to the loopback for concepts, then going to the loopback for concepts, the certain levels details that address some of the concerns we ran into or we designed that for. But not necessarily everybody would have that luxury to get to there. Right? And what's a little bit overwhelming, to be honest with you guys, is like LoopBack actually has so many features, and we support not only just the core foundation, but also the different integration capabilities. Right? So even just taking a few modules alone, I think it's a very sophisticated framework that you can produce a lot of documentations to really explain the usage pattern, the design goals, and the use cases, how to map things together like for example, if people are familiar with some other dependency injection framework like Inversify, right? So by itself is already a fairly interesting framework, and it has a lot of documentations around that. But we built something even more advanced that driven by our use cases, but all documentation is kind of somehow buried with other features. So it has always been a challenge for us. I have to be honest.
That's right. LoopBack is a big framework. Get hold of a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, even think about at some point maybe we should break the LoopBack into a few mini frameworks. Right? Like for example, we can spin off the core foundation into something else. So not only just for the purpose of refactoring or ease of maintenance, but also promote such capabilities to be used independent of the other pieces of the mega loopback framework, right? And of course, like the repository database access is another piece. Like yeah, so there kind of a few very interesting angles you can look at it.
Yep.
I think it's more or less the it is the same issue that we've been trying to resolve over for quite a while, which is how Loopback 4 is perceived in terms of what kind of framework it is.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, because right now comparisons are limited to things like Nest.js or simpler micro frameworks like Express, if they want to make the kind of comparison, and not so much like Loopback and Inversify. So I mean, one way we could do it, as you mentioned, was to potentially put it under a break down Loopback into smaller frameworks so that it's more easily distinguishable. And at the same time, I think we need to also provide, I would think, more articles dedicated to those individual components would be of help. So, for example, the dependency injection framework. Right now, the documentation of that is coupled with all the REST framework material. So for someone who wants to just use the dependency injection framework, they would have to filter through all of that.
Right.
Perhaps one thing we could do is, if as considered for a long-term plan, is to potentially entertain some kind of a documentation filter, or perhaps another sidebar, but one that uses it's just a subset of the current main sidebar for Loopback 4, but catered more for just the dependency injection framework. Thereby, if a user wants to only know and learn about the dependency injection framework, they can filter that out and not have to worry about the other parts of Loopback 4.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, because Loopback does have a lot of different perspectives, and if the user can choose a path to see what's interesting to them, that sort of user experience will be really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's all right with all of you, I'd like to pivot the conversation more towards the recent changes with Travis CI. I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah, good observation. Yeah, so Dan, I can probably give you a quick update. We were able to resolve the issue with Travis CI fairly quickly.
So you were able to resolve the credits issue.
Right.
Yeah, so I think you probably read the news that they have changed the pricing model, and so For each of the org, they have a limited number of credits, and so we run out of the credit within a day. And then so we're able to ask them to give us more credits because we are a truly an open source project, and so they want to support open source projects. So far we have allocated some amounts, and so I probably need to look at it again and to see how long it will last. But I think one of the discussion would be maybe if GitHub Actions is one of the solution, and then maybe does it worth to continue to pursue that, and so that we don't need to hit that quota so quickly.
Yeah, so
I think, go ahead, Rifa.
Raymond, you can continue first.
Oh, okay, yeah. So yes, we can definitely explore other options. So far, Travis has been really helpful to our CI system, and the build performance looks fairly good at this point. So I was able to look at the draft PR from, I believe it was from Rifa, you, right?
The GitHub Actions is
Yeah.
yeah, the PR I have on GitHub Actions. The
Yeah.
GitHub Actions, I've been trying to get it to work. To say the least, I haven't really found exactly what the crux of the issue is.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm
So I
seeing
think
like some very long timeout from these actions. So I'm not sure if the infrastructure was not there yet, or just something else we didn't figure out.
it's like the sandbox app that the test tried to create didn't seem to get bootstrapped into Learner, because that's one of the
okay.
opt-outs. So my guess, my educated guess, is that all the tests that depend on that are not resolving because they can't find the application.
Okay. So at least for the short term, I think Travis is really friendly to open source requests. So I think it might not be a critical problem at this point. We'll keep an eye on that, and if we have more meaningful replacement to that, we will be happy to explore them.
Cool.
So Microsoft, we have the new maintainer Ma join. Maybe we should give him some chance to introduce himself.
Sure, sounds good.
So Mo, you are on mute. If you want to speak, you have to unmute first.
About that. Hi everyone. Yes, Mo Morebudi, short for Morebudi. It's quite a complex, it's on a name to pronounce. I just usually just stick to Mo. So I'm based out in South Africa. Been working on the JavaScript world for quite some time. Before that, I was working on Java, on the Spring framework. Hence why my huge interest in LoopBack, since it adopted a lot of patterns from Spring, if I could say. So I've been for a long time wanting to spend a bit of time on open source, just contributing rather than using. I've been like a heavy user, but I felt that was like a stage where I also just want to contribute to the library development part of it. And LoopBack was a good candidate because we kind of were early adopters of LoopBack on our client projects. So when I picked it up and I just the patterns, the architecture patterns it was following, I felt like, you know what, this is something that resonates with me, and I'll be very happy and proud to be part of the team that does this. So I just like, after COVID lockdown and all that, I was like, let me give it a step. And, the team was so welcoming. So thanks to everyone in the call. So many familiar names, for always, lending a helping hand to ensure that, my transitioning into, the world of library development is as smooth as possible. I'm not sure if there's anything interesting that anyone wants to know other than what I've just mentioned.
That's wonderful. I think we really love the community maintainers like you guys, not only just for the purpose of contribution, but you do use the framework to solve some real world problems, and that kind of incentive and the experience is really valuable to the LoopBack community to make the framework geared toward to the direction that solving real problems.
Agreed. Yes. So just maybe on our use case is quite big. So I work for one of the big American consulting firms, and we have so many clients that we're using LoopBack across. And it's quite an enlightening experience all the time. We go to different complex use cases, and we just drop LoopBack in there, and LoopBack comes out, being able to solve the problem. So yes, as a user, it's something that also makes us very proud to see the work that you guys have put in and materializing to solve actual real problems. Just to echo on your words there, Raymond. So yeah, thanks guys for putting in the work.
I have a question more. What are the areas you would be most interested in contributing to, if there are any that comes to your mind?
On my side,
yep.
The first one at the top of the list is definitely documentation. And the reasons are interesting because my team really struggled when we started off with LoopBack, mainly because of documentation, because they didn't have a lot of Java and Spring knowledge. So I was able to kind of guide them because I had that knowledge. So some of the stuff I could just make assumptions and just based on my understanding of Spring, and then things work out. But for them, it wasn't the case. So yeah, my first important thing on the top of my list is definitely documentation. You'll notice I spend a bit of time these days just on documentation because it kind of resonates well with me, just based on what I just mentioned in terms of my team. So I want to believe a lot of people out there also are facing a challenge using or adopting LoopBack documentation. Not to say it's not enough. I think there's a lot of it. It just needs to be organized in such a manner that it simplifies the user experience or the reader experience. Such a manner that they can just come in, consume what they need when they need it, and solve a specific problem.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. We have been discussing documentation improvements in the first half of the call as well.
Yeah, and then from there, I think other aspects that have always interested me would have been repositories, but I noticed it's quite an interesting one based on how it has been laid out from an architecture perspective. So that's where also I'm having a bit of my eyes feasted on. Then yeah, the rest of the framework, just how dependency injection works, how invasion of control works, how binding works. I think my latest one is on binding. I'm just, trying to do a bit of a deep dive in understanding, okay, how do we actually glue this together in a LoopBack application? Not at a surface level, but more in terms of how were things put together, So yes, I'm interested in, topics in that order, but I think for me at the moment, documentation, it's still kind of the big one.
Cool.
Thanks. Then I just had you can go ahead, Dominic.
Oh, okay, sure. So just going back to somebody was mentioning the to-do tutorial and maybe having an extra step to showing them how to go further than using in-memory connectors. So I have a PR to basically explain how to take the to-do application and how to properly decorate it, the property decorators to use the MySQL connector to give different table names in the database and column names than the actual model names. And just I have a bit of extra information on moving to relational database from the to-do list tutorial. So that PR is under review right now. And while I was doing it, it also helped me understand how, we do have property decorators where we can specify MySQL settings for the normal properties, but with relations, like the belongs to relation decorator, you can't have a decorator on a property that belongs to and as well have an at property decorator. You can't stack decorators. So that's one thing I learned from that. And there's actually a third parameter that belongs to relation where we can specify property relations like the MySQL data and all that stuff, right? So those are some lessons I found switching the to-do example to the relational database connector. So that was my idea, I guess, helping guide people from moving from the in-memory connector to a MySQL connector, all the little tiny things they need to keep in mind. So I have that PR that's under review. I don't know if we're gonna stick it as an example that we put in the actual LoopBack Next product because we don't want to slow down CI jobs. So Miroslav, do you think it's and Raymond, do you think it's best for that particular example that we put it in a separate repository, but we talk about it in the documentation?
If we talk about it in our documentation, then I think it makes sense to keep it in LoopBack Next monorepo together with the docs. But I think it would be good to run the tests in parallel with the rest of the test suite in the same way as we are running acceptance tests for repository against MySQL, MongoDB, etc. So we can have another parallel job running this running your to-do example application against MySQL, and that way it shouldn't slow the CI that much, hopefully.
Right. Yeah. I just wanted to mention it because we mentioned the to-do example and kind of guiding people through the next steps from the in-memory connector. So just want to let everyone know that PR is on its way.
Yeah, Dominic, I think you hit an important point right there. While we're on the topic of connectors and data sources, that kind of brings up another point that I think could be improved in the documentation that I just remembered, which is the feature sets of the specific connectors. Because right now the loopback for connectors, the interfaces are a bit loose. They don't really have the same support from the TypeScript types because of the data source juggler and the abstraction between that. So let's take a case scenario. For example, I want to implement strong relations in my databases. So right now, it's not really easy to find out which specific connectors support strong relations. or even say like which connectors support certain features, or how certain connectors would react to certain say like sorry say like say like when you do migration, etc. So I think the main concern overall with connectors is that it's a bit of a black box right now. So behavior is a bit iffy if you're not too familiar with the specific connectors. And I think we could potentially improve in that area by, for example, maybe potentially adding a feature matrix to each of the connectors, a standard feature matrix, so that the users who read the documentation will be able to identify what features certain connectors support.
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea. A lot of that information is in the readmes for each connector, but yeah, if we have something like a table or something that might help people get a quick understanding, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good suggestion. Like we now have some connector specific feature flags in the JSON file to describe the available connectors, both in loopback 4 and loopback 3. I think in loopback 3 it's in the repository loopback workspace, and in loopback 4 I think now it's in the repository itself. So yeah, I remember we described the discovery and transaction features as true, as supported or not supported. But yes, we can add more like that. And so when people create those connectors, they have some idea like what features this connector support. And I remember we have some connector documentation refactors stories created recently. We can also add that metrics. We can create the metrics and add them to the overview page of the connector documentations.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We discussed a lot of documentation related topics today. Do we want to create any action plan? Any user stories, GitHub issues, or how are we going to ensure our conversation will yield real changes in our docs? Any ideas or suggestions?
Yeah, I think for some of these things, we can write the standalone GitHub issues for them, like the what we talked about at the very end, which is the connector, so like support matrix or overall improvement of the documentation for the connectors. I think we can open up a GitHub issue for that. And also perhaps for bridging the gap between the to-do tutorial and to more intermediary and advanced use cases for LoopBack 4. We could also potentially open up another issue for that.
Okay, sounds good. Would you like to open those issues yourself, Rifa?
Well, currently it's a little late on my end, so I don't think I can really write it to be a comprehensive issue right now. Perhaps maybe later tomorrow.
Oh, sure. Take your time.
Well, technically it's tomorrow already. So, yeah. But yeah, if you want, I can open up the issues later in the day. So.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Is there anything else to discuss?
Hi. So I was just gonna ask, so we have like a lot of old PRs, like some of them are like 2018, some of them 2019. Do you want to have like some like I don't know, a meeting to go through them and see which ones we still want and which ones we want to close or anything like that? Or just leave them open because they've been open for a while, I guess.
That's a good question. Raymond, I think you have many of long-running pull requests. Do you have any reference how to deal with them? Or any suggestions how we should approach?
Yeah, so we probably need to look at what's on the board. So we can try to close as much as we can if nobody has motivation to move some of the PRs forward. I believe I do have a few, but I was able to cut that down to below 10, I believe, for myself. Yeah, so we definitely need to do a little bit try age and figure out what to do there.
Okay.
So far we have 54 PRs, I guess. Yeah. And I believe at least the most recent one being actively worked on. Yeah, so I have 14 PRs. Yeah, some of them we just left them for the future. For example, we did some experiment for NPM 7, but we're not ready to net them yet. What else? Yeah, so yeah, there are a few like the POC getting feedback sort of PRs. I believe maybe we can close some of them for the purpose of house cleaning. Even we close the PR, the branch and the code probably still there later on if we decide to rework on that. It's still possible, I guess.
Yeah, we can always reopen them.
Yeah.
I guess the other aspect is for the PRs that are not created by among this group. And like for us, I think it's easier if we have Slack or some regular meetings that we can like we can talk about it. And but then there's some that I know like we want to have some more changes, but then the user doesn't seem to be have any response anymore. So like I think what would be a best way to take care of that? Like maybe also the same thing that maybe we can take a look whether it's worth pursuing, and then maybe we'll take over the PR if they have signed the CLA or TCO. I think it's also a good time to clean up. Yeah.
Perhaps. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, please go ahead, Rifa.
Okay, so perhaps we could just throwing this as a suggestion up in the air. We could potentially make the bot that closes the stale bot to be a bit more aggressive. Instead of waiting months on end before closing them, we could potentially close them a lot sooner, maybe a month after it's gone stale. So because the stale bot also provides a reminder before it closes the issue, so it gives so that reminder can be useful for reminding those involved in that pull request or issue that the issue or pull request is still there and that perhaps you want to work on it.
An option. I'm not sure if Stalebot distinguishes between issues and pull requests. I think there is only single values for both. So if we make Stalebot more aggressive in closing stale pull requests, it will also close issues sooner, which maybe is a good thing. Another option that comes to my mind is we can post a comment to a stale pull request and then add stale label manually. And I believe the way how Stalebot works is that it looks at a issue or a pull request, and if it has a stale label, then it checks if the stale label has been there for, I think, 2 weeks is our current configuration. And if it was, then it will close the pull request. So we can kind of speed up the first phase where we are waiting to post a notification and label the issue as stale, but keep it open. We can speed up this part by applying the stale label ourselves. And then we can leave it up to the Stalebot to close the pull request if there was no other comment made in the last 2 weeks or in the last 2 weeks after applying the label, if it makes sense.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Though I think the main concern is that would require a bit of intervention from us as maintainers to remember and for us to remember to do that to potential candidates of stale issues or pull requests.
Yeah, that's true.
Because currently,
go ahead.
Yeah. So currently the stale bot is set to put issues and PR stale after 360 days, which I think is a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Because 360 days to get a reminder it's already past the prime of that that issue or pull request. So I think we can bring that down quite a bit.
Maybe to put this into a context, historically we used a higher value because as we were working on the first GA release and then as we were closing the feature gap, there was a lot of issues and epics keeping track of features we knew we are missing, and we wanted to keep those issues open to make them easier to find. But I think by now we kind of addressed all the big feature parity gaps we want to address in the last 2 years. So I think now we can start closing issues sooner if they are not active. So do we have any proposal, like what should be the new timeout be? Like 90 days, 180, or any other value? Should we discuss this in a pull request?
So it's 90 days for pull requests or issues?
For both. It's the same value for both.
Okay. I think it's reasonable, 3 months. We can always reopen, so it's not the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are two values we can adjust, right? So the first is when it actually closes after it's stale, and then that's the one when it decides the issue is actually stale. So while the closure can be 3 months, I think we can pull down the stale a little bit more so that we can get a bit more reminders. So maybe still after 1 or 2 months, then it will close at the 3rd month.
Yeah, that's probably fine.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
And for PRs, I'm not sure, we do have quite a few draft PRs. So would that be a good bucket to track some of the work in progress instead of closing them? Because sometimes my hope is when some community members want to contribute to certain areas, we can point them to some draft PRs we already started, then they can help convert the draft PR to be a production ready feature.
Yeah, if it's a draft PR, we do have labels that Stillbot will not try to close, right? So we have like planning in progress. I'm not too sure if it's applicable for PRs, but we could add a label for PRs that we do not want to close.
I think we have a label called pinned, and that's not closed, so we can use pinned label to keep issues and pull requests open forever. And I'm looking at the Stylebot README, and it looks like they allow you to override things like days until stale or days until close for pull requests and for issues. So we can have different timeout or well, different delay for issues and different for pull requests.
Yeah.
So for example, we can close pull request after 3 months, but keep issues open maybe for 6 months.
Yeah,
Or
I
keep
think
the current 1 year window. Go ahead, Rifa.
Yeah. So I mean I don't put I mean I know it's difficult to handle a lot of community requests, though. I think if we reduce the time that Stillbot tries to close these kind of issues, I think it can be helpful to help push issues to be solved a little quicker. Because typically when users open issues, they would prefer that it would be solved in a reasonable amount of time instead of maybe months on end. Because the main issue I see right now is that there's a lot of old issues that we just haven't really gotten around to do yet.
Yeah, the trouble is that there will be always coming new issues, and if we are not able to get to fix those issues for 1 year, then how likely it is that we will have time to do it in the next year or in 2 years. I think that's one of the reasoning why we are closing those issues, just to acknowledge the fact that there are more issues than we can fix ourselves, and if an issue didn't become a priority for 360 days, then it's very unlikely it will ever be a priority for us to fix. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Okay, I can take on this task myself. I can open up a request with a proposal, and then we can discuss the specific values for days until stale and the days until close. And our time is almost up. I would like to thank you all for joining us today. I think it was a very fruitful discussion, and I hope to see you again in 4 weeks' time. Goodbye. Yep.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you for
Bye.
Bye.